Imagine working alone in a funeral home late at night, only to find that one of the corpses is sitting upright. Or maybe a body comes in that looks just like you. These are 10 real scary stories told by funeral home workers.
This first story comes from Reddit user Spartan Moo, and honestly, it's pretty freaky. Let's check it out. I have a million stories that are more grotesque and gory than this one, but it stands out to me. I was once working at a mortuary and I had to go pick up a man from the medical examiner's office. When you do that, at least where I'm from, you get a receipt when they release the body to you. The receipt has all of the personal belongings that are with the deceased. When I brought the man back to the office, I opened up the body bag to make sure that all the belongings were there and double checked the receipt. But when I opened up the bag, I was stunned to find this dude looked almost exactly like me. He was my age, had similar tattoos in similar spots, and had the same long hair I do, even the same style of jewelry I was wearing. It took me so off guard that I stood there in an existential crisis until the embalmer came in and was like, "Hey Spartan Moo, how's it going? Oh my god, that guy looks just like you." It's the only case I've ever had nightmares about, during which nightmares I'll be the one in the body bag with the deceased man opening me up. I don't blame you for having nightmares. That is the true definition of nightmare fuel.
From Reddit user The Mapes Hotel comes a story we're going to call The Worms. I interned at a funeral home crematorium in high school. I was goth. It was the perfect street cred internship. The funeral home owner was a nice guy, Phil, with a PH, and he always introduced himself that way. He had a family and was married, great sense of humor, bright personality, almost bubbly. About 8 to 9 months after my internship ended, Phil was forced to stop working. He'd begun, according to him, finding worms inside people. Long, white, wriggling worms. Thousands of them filling people's bodies. He'd called the CDC, local doctors, hospitals, other funeral homes on the West Coast. No one else had found the worms, but he began to find them inside every person he worked on. He talked non-stop about the worms, first to his family, then to the families of clients, then to strangers. He had a total breakdown after autopsying a boy who was almost entirely worms, again, according to PH. After the breakdown, Phil was pushed out of his business, and it was sold to a national chain. About 6 months after being forced out, Phil took his own life. While I never read the note itself, his wife later told me that he'd written about being able to feel the worms inside himself and not being able to stand it. He'd begged his wife in the note to follow him and to also kill their offspring, as when he looked at his sons, all he could see were the worms inside them.
This next story comes from Reddit user Goin' Crazy, and it goes as follows. My aunt was a cemetery worker and told me an absolute cracker that happened to her. There was an old chap who would come every Monday at the same time and put roses on his wife's grave. He was a well-known regular visitor and would always stop and chat with the workers. Anyway, she was working on this fine Monday and she saw this chap at his wife's grave like usual. He'd just changed out the roses and she went over to ask if he'd like to give the old ones to her to dispose of. What followed was a normal 20-minute chat talking about all kinds of things, but then he had to go, so she waved him off and he left. The next day when she turned up for work, there was a new work order for the morning, so she went out to find the plot. Turns out it was right next to the chap's wife. Frowning, she checked the work order again and saw that it was the old roses guy. She dug the grave, got it prettied up for the service, and later that morning the funeral home turned up to inter him. She went up to the funeral guy in charge and asked why the rush to bury the old chap. Mortuary worker said, "What do you mean, why the rush?" Aunt, "Well, he was here yesterday putting roses on his wife's grave. What happened to him?" Mortuary worker, he died on Thursday, last week." Aunt, "No, he was here yesterday." Points at fresh roses on his wife's grave. Mortuary worker, looking at the flowers, "Are you sure it was him?" Aunt, "Yeah, we had a chat like we always do. He was talking about his daughter's new kid." Mortuary worker, "Wow, seems like a pretty classic case of a ghost sighting. Kind of sweet, more so than freaky though. I don't know, I like this one."
This next Redditor used to work in a morgue in Florida. They shared a few short stories in their response to a thread about some of the creepiest and most uncomfortable things morgue or funeral home workers ever experienced. Writing, "Uncomfortable? Being trapped in the morgue alone during a hurricane. Our morgue was basically in a basement type situation and the hospital was near a main waterway that flooded. I had to move all the bodies to the highest cabinets, pray the generators would keep everyone cold and was standing on my desk for about 2 hours when someone finally came for me. Bizarre would be a drowned guy who is dead on arrival, and once locked up in the cabinet, a tapping noise started coming from him. It was a crab that had made itself at home inside him, and when it got cold, he wanted out. Creepy was when we got some people who were doing bath salts and had eaten other people. They looked crazy even in death. This Redditor never even said they were from Florida. A commenter just pieced it together based on the stories, and he was like, yep, Florida. It's wild over there.
This next story comes from Reddit user Ash9260, and it goes like this. I work at a hospital in the lab, and one day I was dropping off a bunch of limbs to the morgue after hours. We put them in the freezer with the bodies. I went in to put the legs and arms in the back. The freezer door was closed, but it doesn't lock. For some reason though, when I went to leave, I couldn't get the door open. I was stuck. And the morgue is in a weird spot of the hospital. It takes like 3 rooms to get to it, and it's a very big freezer, and no one can hear you scream from the inside. Anyways, I was screaming nonetheless, like as loud as I could, trying to get out. And the freezer was so packed that I accidentally hit a dead body in my panic. I did get out a few minutes later. The part that is so strange though was my patient I had for 4 months died that day and was in the morgue when this happened. We talked a lot, and I told him at one point how scared I was of getting locked in the morgue. He had asked about the morgue because he knew he was dying and was curious. Anyways, I'd like to think that it was him playing a prank on me. That story's like 30% cute and like 70% quit your job and never go anywhere near another mortuary ever again terrifying. I'm just saying. It's a no from me.
From Cylons in a police box comes a story I'm going to call the moaning. This comes from my mother back when she was younger. A guy she knows takes a job at the local funeral home. He works the graveyard shift. All was well for the first few months, but dude is often weirded out at work. Claims the building is haunted. Earlier in the evening, they get a call from the hospital saying that they have a lady there ready for pickup. They pick her up. Guy is freaking out, says he has a bad feeling. Later in the evening, the mortician has to step out for a bit, leaving the guy there alone with the dead lady. He goes about his work, still a little freaked out. Suddenly, he hears this low, soft moan. He swears it's just his mind playing tricks on him, goes about his business, hears it again, a little louder this time. It's late, he's alone, he's just hearing things, probably just the pipes settling. The plumbing is old, after all. Short time passes, and it's louder. At this point, he's sure he isn't just imagining things. He knows he heard the dead lady moan. His first thought was the mortician was messing with him. He's been shaken all evening, and this a-hole is pranking him. He marches over, yanks back the sheet covering the dead lady, expecting to find the mortician somewhere around her. Dead lady grabs the guy's wrist. He lets out this scream and bolts for the door, forgets his car, just runs all the way home. Turns out the old lady wasn't dead. Hospital got it wrong. Hooray 1950s medicine. She'd been in a coma or something, and they'd been sure she'd passed on earlier that morning. She woke up at the funeral home and scared the ever-living hell out of the assistant. He quit the next day, said he would never set foot there ever again. And fair enough.
This next story comes from Reddit user Missy Maypen, and it's both horrifying and, like the last one, kind of miraculous. It goes like this. When my cousin was 18, he was in a bad car wreck, and he, his girlfriend, and her sister were all pronounced dead at the scene. The police arrived to inform my aunt, his mom, and she asked that he be sent to a very specific funeral home. While the funeral director was preparing to embalm him, he sat up on the table and asked, "Where the hell am I?" The funeral director said it was the first time he ever had to go home and change his pants. I should add that at the time my brother asked that question, the top of his head was open and his brain was exposed. He was sent to the hospital, and the same police officer who told my aunt he had died told her that he was in fact not dead and was now in the hospital. They thought he'd be in a vegetative state for the rest of his life, but a few weeks later he walked out of the hospital. He has horrible headaches on occasion, but he's led a successful life and he's a great guy. Talk about a plot twist.
Alright, this one's not as miraculous. Put your food down for this one. The imagery I got in my head reading this, anyway, thought I'd share. This one comes to us from Reddit user Kuda Ravage. Lady I work with used to pick up the bodies for the coroner. One time they had to collect a woman that was lying in a very hot attic apartment for a couple months. All her liquids ran out onto the floor and dried. When they tried to pick her up, she started coming apart like an overly tender turkey. Her coworker sent her to the van to get more bags. When she got back, he'd finished bagging the lady. Classy. Changed how I think about turkey.
Alright, this next one comes from yet another Reddit user. This time it's the 8th Henry. It's both scary and funny, and it goes like this. My neighbor, a while back before I moved in, was a mortician. He didn't have any creepy stories per se, but one that sticks out concerns this one night he had a body he was preparing for a very early morning wake or service, whatever was going on. It was unusual, and so it required him to work to the wee hours of the morning on this particular corpse. So as he's working on it, he turned his back to grab some tools or supplies, and the angle he was standing at with regard to the corpse left the body visible just out of the corner of his eye. As he was looking down at whatever tools he was getting, in the corner of his eye he saw the body slowly start to sit up. His fight-flight instinct immediately kicked in and he ran up the stairs as fast as he possibly could, but he was so clumsy trying to get up the stairs that he tripped and was pretty much crawling and clawing his way to the top. He was almost near the top of the stairs before his senses finally came back and he realized it was rigor mortis. He collected himself and started to laugh at how absurd it all was. He'd been doing this for 15 to 20 years at this point, and he had never had a freak out like that before where instinct overtook knowledge and experience. He also sheepishly admitted that he had to go clean himself after because he had shit his pants in the panic.
And I thought I'd finish off with a tale to lift your spirits just a little, even though some of you may find this one the most horrific of all. From Reddit user Sweet Oklahoma, we have the tale of the gas. It goes as follows. My best friend works in the death business. She tells me all sorts of lovely things about her job, but my favorite involves a gurney and some stairs. A family called in that their mother had passed in their apartment. 3rd story, narrow halls, no elevators. Anyway, she goes to pick up the body to take back to the funeral home with an assistant. So they get up there and lift this woman who is close to 300 pounds onto the gurney and begin their journey down to the van. Mind you, the whole family was there and pretty much in hysterics, crowding around as they make their way to the stairs. They make it about halfway down the first flight of stairs when the body starts to slide. There's no way to reposition, so my friend, who is at the foot of the gurney, is now about butt level to the freshly deceased. So trying to make the best of the situation, they continue their way down and try not to shift the body anymore. The thing about dead bodies is that gas starts to exit pretty quickly, and I'm sure you know where my story's going. The body started letting out farts straight into my friend's face with every step down they take, and this poor girl has to keep a straight face while getting crop dusted by a dead lady while her whole family is watching. Well, we hope you enjoyed some of those horrifying and somewhat amusing tales. Man, working in a funeral home, it would never be boring, gotta say that.
It is not something I would ever do. If you do or have worked in a funeral home, you know anyone who has with some stories, leave them down below. We'll be sure to check them out. Cheers.